Shane wasn't just Alan Ladd's signature role, it was a 2-year editing nightmare that nearly bankrupted Paramount, the film Howard Hughes refused and then desperately wanted to buy, and the Western that exists because a 5'6" actor who hated guns spent 116 takes trying to fire a revolver with his eyes closed. While audiences watched a mysterious gunfighter sacrifice everything for homesteaders in the Wyoming Territory, behind the cameras lurked a director who spent an entire year editing footage, a child actor deliberately sabotaging emotional scenes by sticking his tongue out, and a studio so desperate they tried to dump their expensive Western as a B picture before the enthusiasm of Hughes forced them to reconsider. Here are 20 weird facts about Shane that reveal what happens when perfectionism meets panic. And stick around for the bonus fact, because what the author of the original novel thought about Alan Ladd is still one of Hollywood's most brutal dismissals. Let's ride into the chaos. Number 20. Alan Ladd required 116 takes for the gun demonstration scene because he hated and was terrified of firearms. Alan Ladd disliked and was uncomfortable with guns, ironic for a man playing one of cinema's most famous gunfighters. The scene where Shane demonstrates his shooting skills for Joey required 116 takes before Stevens got usable footage. The terror of Ladd regarding firearms was so pronounced that careful review of the final cut shows him firing with his eyes closed. Later, in the saloon battle, the pistol of Ladd points well away from the man he shoots, especially in the final scene where he kills the brother of Riker. To compensate, Sue Carroll, the wife of Ladd, purchased a specially modified Colt single-action army revolver with the trigger removed, creating a slip hammer that fired simply by fanning the hammer back. The front sight was also removed. This simplified operation helped Ladd perform the famous gun twirling in the climactic showdown, though stuntman Rod Redwing actually performed the more complex twirling shots. The gun phobia of Ladd nearly derailed his signature role. Number 19. Brandon DeWilde deliberately sabotaged the emotional final scene by crossing his eyes and sticking out his tongue. The final scene where wounded Shane explains to Joey why he must leave, "There's no living with a killing," was moving for the entire cast and crew except Brandon DeWilde. Every time Ladd spoke his farewell lines, DeWilde crossed his eyes and stuck out his tongue, making Ladd laugh and ruining takes. Finally, Ladd called to the father of the boy, "Make the kid stop or I'll beat him over the head." DeWilde behaved. The deliberate sabotage of the child actor extended shooting time and frustrated everyone involved, but it revealed the 10-year-old's mischievous personality. Despite his on-set antics, DeWilde delivered one of cinema's most iconic moments when he cries, "Shane, come back!" In the film's conclusion, a line that became permanently embedded in American pop culture. The emotional power of the scene came despite, not because of, the cooperation of DeWilde. Number 18. George Stevens originally wanted Montgomery Clift and William Holden, then cast Ladd, Heflin, and Arthur in 3 minutes. Director George Stevens originally wanted Montgomery Clift as Shane and William Holden as Joe Starrett. When both decided to do other films instead, Shane was nearly abandoned entirely. Stevens finally asked Paramount executive why Frank Freeman, who was available. Upon seeing a list of actors with current contracts to the studio, Stevens cast Alan Ladd, Van Heflin, and Jean Arthur within 3 minutes. This hasty casting actually proved brilliant. The compact stature and vulnerability of Ladd contrasted perfectly with the towering villains. Heflin brought moral complexity to Starrett, and Arthur, coming out of semi-retirement as a favor to Stevens, added depth to what could have been a thankless wife role. The 3-minute casting decision saved the film from cancellation and created one of cinema's most perfectly balanced ensembles. The instinct of Stevens to cast quickly when faced with cancellation became legendary. Number 17. The film was completed in October 1951 but not released until August 1953. Stevens edited for nearly 2 years. Principal photography wrapped in October 1951 after 75 days of filming. Then, George Stevens began editing, and editing, and editing. The amount of coverage Stevens shot resulted in an extremely protracted editing process lasting nearly 2 full years. The film finally premiered at Radio City Music Hall on April 23, 1953, almost 18 months after filming wrapped. The perfectionist approach of Stevens drove costs astronomically high for what should have been a straightforward Western. The original budget was $1.9 million for 48 days of shooting. The final cost exceeded $3 million after 75 days of filming. The editing delay alone added hundreds of thousands in costs. Paramount executives despaired, watching their investment sit in editing rooms while Stevens obsessively refined every frame. His meticulous approach created a masterpiece, but nearly bankrupted the faith of the studio in the project. Number 16, Paramount tried to sell the film to Howard Hughes, who refused, then offered to buy it after seeing the rough cut. As costs spiraled and the editing dragged on, Paramount executives panicked. They approached Howard Hughes about taking over the property, essentially trying to dump their expensive problem. Hughes declined. Then he saw a rough cut. Hughes immediately changed his mind and offered to buy the film on the spot. His sudden enthusiasm made Paramount rethink their entire strategy. Originally planning to release Shane as a B picture with minimal marketing, the eagerness of Hughes signaled they had something special. Paramount decided to promote Shane as one of the studio's flagship films of the year. The strategy proved correct. Shane became a massive critical and commercial success, easily recouping its inflated budget. The reversal of Hughes saved the film from B-picture obscurity. His taste, however questionable in other contexts, validated the investment of Paramount and forced them to recognize the masterpiece they'd nearly discarded. Number 15. Jack Palance had such severe horse problems that Stevens used one perfect dismount for every scene, run in reverse for mounts. Jack Palance was nervous around horses and had great difficulty mounting and dismounting. After very many failed attempts, he finally executed one flawless dismount. Stevens immediately recognized the solution, used that single perfect dismount for all of the dismounts of Wilson in the film, then run the footage in reverse for his mounts. The technique worked seamlessly. Palance looked so awkward on horseback that Stevens was forced to replace the introductory ride into town of Wilson, originally showing Palance galloping dramatically, with Palance riding at walking pace. Stevens later noted that this forced change actually made the entrance of Wilson more dramatic and menacing. The slow, deliberate approach conveyed calculated danger better than energetic riding. Palance spent all his spare time during production delays practicing with horses and guns, eventually becoming highly proficient at both, but that one perfect dismount remained the foundation of the equestrian appearances of his character. Number 14. The author of the original novel called Alan Ladd that runt and wanted George Raft instead. When asked if he enjoyed the movie, Shane author Jack Schaefer replied, "Yeah, I did. All except for that runt," referring to the 5'6" Alan Ladd. In 1989, Schaefer told the Oberlin Alumni magazine that his Shane character was supposed to be a dark, deadly person whom he'd hoped would be played by George Raft. The Shane of Schaefer in the 1949 novel was tall, imposing, physically intimidating, everything Ladd wasn't. The contempt of the author for the casting of Ladd never wavered despite the film's massive success and the acclaim of Ladd. Schaefer felt Hollywood had fundamentally misunderstood his vision by casting a compact, almost pretty leading man instead of a menacing film noir gangster type. Ironically, the vulnerability and compact stature of Ladd gave Shane unexpected emotional depth. Audiences connected with a hero who looked overmatched physically but triumphed through skill and moral conviction. The preferred version of Schaefer would have been darker but likely less beloved. Number 13. Ladd was only 5'6". Stevens used camera tricks, trenches, and platform shoes to make him appear taller. The height of Alan Ladd was Hollywood's worst-kept secret. When he appears in scenes with Van Heflin, the two are about the same height, although Heflin was far taller. When Ladd is shown with Jean Arthur, he's perhaps a bit taller than she. When Heflin is shown with her, Heflin is far taller. Stevens achieved this through elaborate tricks. Digging trenches for taller actors to stand in during two shots, placing Ladd on apple boxes or platforms, using forced perspective, and dressing Ladd in boots with elevated heels. Despite these efforts, the compact stature of Shane is frankly visible throughout. He's a neat, compact man, no physical match for the hired guns like Wilson and Calloway who tower over him, as Roger Ebert noted. Rather than undermining the character, the size of Ladd paradoxically enhanced the mythic quality of Shane. He triumphed despite physical disadvantage through skill, courage, and moral superiority. The camera tricks became part of Hollywood legend. Number 12. George Stevens fired gunshots into a garbage can to create the shocking sound effects. The first gunshots in the film occur when Shane demonstrates shooting for Joey. To enhance the dramatic effect and startle audiences, Stevens wanted the gunfire sounds much louder than standard Hollywood effects. His solution: firing a large caliber weapon into a garbage can and recording the echoed reverberations. The amplified sound made gunshots viscerally powerful. The intention of Stevens was deliberately startling audiences with the first firing of a gun, establishing violence as horrifying rather than entertaining. This innovation, according to film historian Jay Hyams, marked the beginning of graphic violence in Western movies. Sam Peckinpah later said, "When Jack Palance shot Elisha Cook Jr. in Shane, things started to change. Stevens also had the two principal shooting victims, Palance and Cook, rigged with hidden wires that jerked them violently backward when shot, creating unprecedented physical realism that shocked 1953 audiences accustomed to bloodless Western deaths. Number 11. A.B. Guthrie Jr. won the Pulitzer Prize but had never written a screenplay before Shane. A.B. Guthrie Jr. was a novelist who'd won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction in 1950 for The Way West. While Howard Hawks was producing the adaptation of Guthrie's The Big Sky, he recommended Guthrie to George Stevens to adapt Shane for the screen. Despite Guthrie having never written a screenplay before, Shane is one of only two movies. Guthrie is credited as screenwriter. The other is 1955's The Kentuckian. Co-writer Jack Schur was also new to movie making when he helped pen Shane, though his subsequent career included 14 more movies and 3 episodes of Bewitched. The literary sensibility of Guthrie gave Shane unusual depth and moral complexity for 1950s westerns. His lack of screenwriting experience meant he wasn't constrained by Hollywood formula. He adapted the novel of Schaeffer faithfully while adding visual poetry that elevated the material. Stevens trusted the literary instincts of Guthrie over conventional screenwriting wisdom. Number 10. Jean Arthur was over 50 years old playing Marion Starrett, 10 years older than the grizzled old villain Rufus Riker. Jean Arthur was over 50 years old when she played Marion Starrett. She was, in fact, 10 years older than Emil Meyer, who plays grizzled old cattle baron Rufus Riker. Arthur came out of semi-retirement largely as a favor to her friend, director George Stevens. Shane was the first cinematic role of Arthur in 5 years and her last film appearance at age 50, though she later appeared in theater and a short-lived television series. The age of Arthur paradoxically worked. Her performance has weathered wisdom and deep emotional intelligence that younger actresses couldn't have conveyed. A committed animal lover, Arthur took it upon herself to personally inspect the conditions of the livestock of the film. If they weren't to her satisfaction, she ensured the matter was rectified. Her professionalism and care for every production detail elevated everyone around her. After Shane, Arthur retired completely from the film business. Number 9. The funeral scene dog refused to look into the grave. Stevens had the trainer lie in the coffin. In the funeral scene, the dog consistently refused to look into the grave, no matter what the crew tried. Finally, Stevens had the trainer of the dog lie down in the bottom of the grave. The dog immediately looked down and played his part ably. The coffin, loaded with rocks for appropriate effect, was then lowered into the grave. When the harmonica player began spontaneously playing Dixie, the crew was so moved by the scene that they began shoveling dirt into the grave before remembering a live person was still down there. They frantically stopped, pulled the trainer out, then resumed filming. The anecdote reveals the creative problem-solving of Stevens and the emotional investment of the crew in the material. That funeral scene, which appears briefly on screen, required elaborate staging and nearly buried a stuntman alive. The performance of the dog, achieved through the sacrifice of the trainer, added authentic grief to a pivotal moment. Number 8. The film was shot in standard 1.37:1, then cropped to 1.66:1 widescreen. Cinematographer Loyal Griggs was aghast. Although the film was shot using the standard 1.37:1 Academy ratio, Paramount picked Shane to debut its widescreen system because it was composed largely of long and medium shots that wouldn't be compromised by cropping. Using a newly cut aperture plate in movie projectors and a wider angle lens, the film was exhibited in first-run venues at 1.66:1. For its premiere, Paramount replaced the Radio City Music Hall 34 by 25-foot screen with one measuring 50 feet wide by 30 feet high. Cinematographer Loyal Griggs was aghast at what happened to his images when the negative was blown up and cropped. The color faded considerably. However, he got over it when he won the Academy Award for Best Cinematography, the only Academy Award win of the film. Stevens had no idea Shane would be exhibited in widescreen when he shot it in 1951. The cropping happened during the 2-year editing process as widescreen became industry standard. Number 7. Stevens imported scrawny-looking cattle from other areas because local herds looked too well-fed and healthy. Meticulous care was taken at all levels of production. All physical props were true to the period, buildings were built to 1880s specifications, and clothing was completely authentic. But Stevens noticed the local Wyoming cattle looked too well-fed and healthy for a hardscrabble homesteader story about land struggles. So he had somewhat scrawny-looking cattle imported from other areas to create authentic frontier poverty aesthetics. The attention to period detail extended to every visible element. Even background cattle had to look historically accurate. This perfectionism drove costs higher but created unprecedented authenticity. The imported cattle appear throughout the film, visual evidence that Stevens prioritized historical accuracy over convenience. His obsession with every detail, from major performances to background livestock, separated Shane from typical Hollywood westerns where props and set dressing were afterthoughts. Stevens treated everything as essential to the emotional truth of the film. Number 6. Van Heflin and Alan Ladd became firm friends. Heflin cried when he learned of the premature death of Ladd. Van Heflin and Alan Ladd became firm friends during the production of Shane despite their different backgrounds and temperaments. In later years, the wife of Heflin said one of the very rare times she ever saw her husband cry was when he learned of the premature death of Ladd in 1964 at age 50. Ladd died from an accidental overdose of sedatives and alcohol, though whether it was suicide remains disputed. Heflin, who'd won an Academy Award for Johnny Eager and built a distinguished career, was devastated by losing his Shane co-star. Their on-screen chemistry reflected genuine affection. The barn-raising fistfight scene where Shane and Joe battle the men of Riker together showcased their bonded camaraderie. When Heflin died in 1971 at age 60, both Shane stars were gone far too young. Their friendship, forged during the difficult production of Shane, endured beyond the film and revealed the human connections that made the emotional core of the movie authentic. Number 5. Shane earned $9 million in United States theater rentals, equivalent to $20 million in actual box office receipts. Shane premiered in New York City at Radio City Music Hall on April 23, 1953, and grossed $114,000 in its 4 weeks there. In all, the film earned about $9 million in theater rentals from the United States and Canada. By one estimate, that translates into approximately $20 million in actual box office receipts, massive returns for 1953. The film became one of the highest-grossing westerns of the decade, vindicating the decision of Paramount to promote it as a flagship release after the enthusiasm of Howard Hughes. Adjusted for inflation, that $20 million gross equals roughly $230 million today. The financial success proved the 2-year editing obsession of Stevens was justified and established Shane as both critical masterpiece and commercial triumph. The near-catastrophic decision of Paramount to sell the film to Hughes would have cost them tens of millions in profits. The studio learned an expensive lesson: trust perfectionist directors even when costs spiral, because sometimes mania produces masterpieces. Number 4. The film received 6 Academy Award nominations including Best Picture, lost to From Here to Eternity. Shane received 6 Academy Award nominations: Best Picture, Best Director, Stevens; Best Supporting Actor, Brandon DeWilde and Jack Palance; Best Adapted Screenplay, A.B. Guthrie Jr., and Best Cinematography, Loyal Griggs. The film won only 1 Academy Award, Loyal Griggs for Best Cinematography, despite him being aghast at the widescreen cropping. Shane lost Best Picture to From Here to Eternity, which swept the ceremony with 8 wins including Best Picture and Best Director. Had it not been for From Here to Eternity, Shane probably would have been the year's Academy Award picture. As it was, Stevens won Directorial Academy Awards for the films that immediately preceded and followed Shane: A Place in the Sun, 1951, and Giant, 1956, making the Best Director loss of Shane particularly notable. The Academy recognized the technical mastery of Shane, but gave top honors to Fred Zinnemann's military drama. The legacy of Shane transcended Academy Award losses. It became the paradigmatic Western that defined the genre for generations. Number 3. The film debuted the widescreen system of Paramount months before CinemaScope's The Robe. Shane became the first widescreen film of the modern era, beating out The Robe and its CinemaScope format by several months. Although Shane was shot in Academy ratio, the decision of Paramount to crop and exhibit it at 1.66 to 1 made it the inaugural modern widescreen release. This accidental distinction gave Shane a unique place in film history as both a thoroughbred Western and a technological guinea pig. For successive generations of cinephiles, Shane was only available in Academy ratio. Television prints and home video editions reverted back to 1.37 to 1, erasing the widescreen experiment. Paramount produced all subsequent films at 1.66 to 1 until 1954, when it switched to 1.85 to 1, making the ratio of Shane historically specific. The widescreen debut was accidental timing rather than artistic choice, but it positioned Shane as a pioneering technical achievement alongside its narrative and artistic triumphs. Stevens never intended widescreen; it was imposed during the editing delay. Number 2. George Stevens' voice appears in the film during the bar fight. He says, "Knock him back to the pig pen." During the bar fight between Shane and Calloway, the off-screen voice that says "knock him back to the pig pen" is director George Stevens himself. Stevens occasionally inserted his own voice into his films when he needed specific line readings that extras couldn't deliver. The line appears during the chaotic brawl scene where Shane and Joe battle the men of Riker in the saloon. Most audiences never notice the cameo of the director, but it represents the hands-on approach of Stevens to every production element. He didn't trust the scene to background performers, he needed precise timing and delivery for the off-screen commentary. The voice insertion was done in post-production, allowing Stevens to control the barroom chaos orally even when visual coverage was complete. His brief vocal appearance became one of the hidden details of Shane, discovered only by film scholars and obsessive fans examining the audio track. The perfectionism of Stevens extended even to throwaway background dialogue. Number 1. In the final Shane comeback scene, Alan Ladd didn't ride the horse, a famous short rodeo rider doubled him. In the last scene where Shane leaves the village, while Joey cries, "Shane, come back," Alan Ladd did not ride the horse. A famous rodeo rider who was also of short stature worked as the double. This substitution was necessary because the scene required complex horsemanship while portraying Shane as wounded and exhausted, a combination Ladd couldn't safely execute. The double rides away into the distance while DeWilde delivers cinema's most famous farewell. The substitution was seamless because both Ladd and his double were similarly compact, and the distance made facial features invisible. Most audiences assumed they were watching Ladd throughout. The emotional power of the scene comes entirely from the performance of DeWilde and the soaring musical score of Victor Young, not from anything Ladd does. The departure of Shane becomes mythic precisely because we can't see his face. He rides into legend, becoming more symbol than man. The stunt double inadvertently enhanced the power of the scene by making the exit of Shane anonymous and universal. Bonus fact: the film was adapted from the debut novel of Jack Schaefer published in 1949. Paramount bought rights immediately. The novel Shane was published in 1949 as the debut fiction work of journalist Jack Schaefer. Paramount purchased film rights immediately, recognizing the cinematic potential of the story. It's unclear when George Stevens became involved, but apparently his son George Jr. read Shane while in college and suggested to his father that it would make a good film. The novel of Schaefer was relatively short, around 120 pages in most editions, making it ideal for adaptation without excessive cutting. The spare prose and mythic simplicity translated perfectly to the visual storytelling style of Stevens. Schaefer was a working journalist with no previous fiction publications, making the success of Shane as both novel and film adaptation remarkable. The book has never gone out of print since 1949. Continuing to sell based partially on the enduring popularity of the film. Schaefer wrote several other Western novels, but none achieved the cultural penetration of Shane. His contempt for the casting of Ladd never diminished his pride in the success of the film adaptation, though he always maintained his Shane was taller, darker, and deadlier than the version of Hollywood. Shane premiered in August 1953 after spending 2 years in editing purgatory. The perfectionism of George Stevens nearly bankrupted Paramount. Howard Hughes refused to buy it, then desperately wanted it. The studio planned to dump it as a B picture before the enthusiasm of Hughes forced reconsideration. Alan Ladd spent 116 takes trying to fire a gun with his eyes closed. Jack Palance couldn't mount a horse. Brandon DeWilde sabotaged emotional scenes by sticking out his tongue. And somehow, through all that chaos, Stevens created one of cinema's most perfect westerns. The film that Jack Schaefer dismissed because of that runt became the signature role of Alan Ladd. The cattle imported from other states because local herds looked too healthy created unprecedented authenticity. The garbage can gunshot sound effects revolutionized Western violence. The accidentally widescreen release pioneered modern aspect ratios. The 2-year editing nightmare produced a masterpiece that earned $20 million and changed the genre forever. 73 years later, Shane, Come Back remains cinema's most heartbreaking farewell. A compact gunfighter who hated guns rode into legend because George Stevens trusted his 3-minute casting instinct, refused to compromise his vision, and spent 2 years editing until every frame was perfect.